Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Live Without Training Wheels show. This is a special gathering for our large family homeschooling group. And I am delighted that we have Karen and Michelle from Layers of Learning here with us this evening. I'm your host. My name is Lena Sutherland, and I'm the owner and author at Homeschooling Without Training Wheels. Hey Lainey, welcome. And in just a minute, we'll get to the meat of the conversation with Karen and Michelle. Let me go over just a few details. First of all, down at the bottom of the screen, there is a poll. So I'm just curious to know who of the audience here tonight has tried either Layers of Learning or their writers' workshops or both. Certainly any answer is okay, but it's just fun to kind of know what your background or your experience is as we go and talk about this. And then right next to the button where it says polls, there's a button that says ask a question. So at any time during our live video tonight, if you've got a question, go ahead and pop your question into that box, and then we'll be able to answer it at the end of the discussion when we get to our Q&A time. And also, if you're watching on the replay, the Ask a Question box can be useful to you because you can open that up, and as we answer those questions tonight, I can timestamp them, and that way you can jump right to those answers during the replay if you're interested in doing that. So, okay, let's hop right in. Karen and Michelle, thank you for being here with us this evening. And just to give you all a little background, if you're not familiar, Karen and Michelle are sisters, homeschool moms, and the authors of the homeschool curriculum, but like curriculum with an asterisk beside it, Layers of Learning. And they can tell you a little bit more about that. But more recently, they've come out with another really helpful tool called Writers' Workshops. And I highly recommend these. I've been using them this year, but a lot of what they will be sharing with us tonight is the kind of stuff that has more to do with just thinking about how you're teaching writing. So even if you aren't using those particular resources, there will be lots of good information here for you, but I do want you to know about them, because if you're hearing this and you're thinking, who can show me how to do more of this? Well, Karen and Michelle can. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but I just wanted you to know, what do we mean when we say Layers of Learning, and what is Writers' Workshops? So let's talk a little bit about that. Karen and Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about how you, before Writers' Workshop was ever a product, how did you begin doing Writers' Workshops in your homeschool with your kids?
Well, honestly, when I think about it, I actually didn't start with my kids. I went to college to become a teacher. I always thought I'd be a teacher. And so I have a degree in education, and that was my focus. And so I did student teaching with a phenomenal teacher who, it was first grade, and I watched her do this with 30 first graders.
Wow.
And it was incredible. We talk about large family homeschooling, and I watched her teach 30 first graders how to write quite miraculously, actually. She was phenomenal. So I was kind of trained in this style and then worked with her, and that was an awesome, awesome experience. Fast forward years later, I decided I liked my own kids better than kids in the classroom, and I became a homeschool mom. And I just kind of grew into this naturally with my kids. I never really used other writing curriculums. I just wanted to teach them writing really organically in small little doses and really, really happily and joyfully. So I've just always done it. And what happened is we were blogging, and I started sharing some of the ideas that I did with my kids in writing. And little by little, people started to ask more and more, like, I need you to tell me about that. Give me more ideas.
I was one of those people that was asking her, because I have struggled with teaching my children writing as well. And I think it's one of the hardest things to teach, because writing programs don't break down the steps. And that's what Karen does when she writes these Writers' Workshop units. She really breaks down the tiny little steps that writers need to be successful. And that's what I needed to have done for me. And so she has done that with Writers' Workshop, and we've worked together on it. But it's changed my homeschool, the way that we write.
Yeah. So guys who are watching, let me know if you can relate to this. So, I write on my blog. I do plenty of writing. And so I have a good idea of what sounds good, how, things go together. But, I'd read my kids' writing, and I'd be like, okay, I see where they are. I know where I want them to go. But A, I don't know how to get from here to there. And B, I don't know how to explain to them what to look for or what to do. Like, I can look at my kids' writing and I can go, well, that's not a complete sentence, or that's a run-on sentence. But how to get them to identify that? Like, what? How do I, so that's exactly what I found helpful with that too. So, okay, so following along with that idea, what age range are your kids now, just to kind of help us know the context? And then how young do you start them with layers of learning, or how young were they when you started layers of learning? Or excuse me, writers workshops. That's what I mean to be saying.
We're in the glory days of homeschooling right now because, we both have big families, but our oldest kids are done. They're in college.
We've moved them into college, most of them.
And so we've been talking lately. It is so easy to homeschool when you've been homeschooling a big family, and then the family starts shrinking, and you go, "Oh, I only have 2 kids to teach now."
We each only have 2 now that we're teaching at home, and mine are 11 and 13.
My kids are 9 and 12, and then I do have a 16-year-old who is home and part of our homeschool, but she is full-time community college. So I still help her, with things, but she's not here with us all of the time. But we did this with our kids when we had all the kids at home too. And I really encourage moms to focus on starting writing instruction around age 8. I know that before that, they're going to be writing as in handwriting and learning letter formation and basic, here's how to write the word pig and cat and things like that. But while they're mastering those things, it's really hard for them to get into the really big ideas of writing. And that's what you're going for, is the ideas.
However, if you have older children and younger ones, your younger ones, when they're 5 or 6 or 7, can still join in writer's workshop. They're probably going to want to. So you can just adjust assignments down for them. But if your oldest is 6, you don't need to start yet. Wait until they're around 8.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then again, I was sitting with one of my best friends. She has 3 little kids that she's homeschooling. Her oldest is 6 right now. And her 6-year-old was one of those girls who learned to read pretty much by herself at age 4. And I was sitting with her the other day, and she was writing this whole elaborate story about a surprise birthday party, and it was several pages, and she was illustrating it. And yeah, she's 6, but she's ready for writer's workshop.
Mm-hmm,
So part of it is that you have to gauge that depending on where your kid is.
So solid like fluent handwriting is one of the steps that you'd look for. And then
if
also
they're learning the alphabet, you shouldn't be focusing on writing too much. They have enough focus when they're learning to read and they're learning their alphabet. As soon as that's mastered and really solid, they're ready to start putting that into ideas.
Okay, that's helpful. Lainey says, the shrinking family. I feel that already with only 1 done and 1 senior.
It's amazing how freeing it is. You go, wow.
It's really amazing.
Especially when you were teaching like advanced math, and then all of a sudden, oh, math just got easier.
That's not bad.
Okay, I'm going to look forward to that. We are absolutely not there yet. We're still in the phase of like, every year I have more homeschoolers than I had last year. So
we've been there.
Yeah.
Okay. So you actually kind of answered my next question already about some of the appropriateness of, when to start and all that. So that's awesome. So now the next thing I'd love to ask you about is, what do you all do if you have reluctant writers? So maybe somebody who, you're fairly confident skill-wise that they're ready to do this, but as you ask them to do something or are working on a project with them, maybe they just don't want to write, or maybe they have, they are doubting themselves whether they can do this. How do you encourage those reluctant or resistant writers?
So, all of my sons, I have 6 sons, and they are all reluctant writers. None of them ever wanted to write. They hated writing, which is part of the reason I needed Karen so much. But what I've learned is that it wasn't them, it was me.
Okay.
It was the way I was approaching writing with them that was the problem. It wasn't that they needed to do something to change. It was me. So I kept pulling out the red pen, and all I really knew how to do was look for spelling errors, grammar errors, put in the periods, make them fix it. It was not fun. It was not fun at all.
What does your son call the red pen?
The red pen of doom. He calls it the red pen of doom. And actually, he thinks it's funny now. But when it was me, all I did was criticize. And I didn't know that I was doing that. I guess I was modeling what was my experience from elementary school, or, my school experience. That's all I knew. And Karen is the one that taught me, no, you're teaching growth. They're getting their ideas down. This isn't about mechanics. It's not about spelling. Eventually you want those things to come, but this is really about getting ideas down, and you're teaching them that their ideas are important and that they can get those down on paper. So when I changed my attitude, it changed the way my kids felt about writing. And we coupled that with, fun. Karen's got some fun, high interest kind of assignments that, or I wouldn't call them assignments, exercises.
I try to break down writing into really little bits. So I would rather have my kids write a lot of little bits during the day than have them sit down and tackle a huge thing. And that kind of erases some of the reluctance when they don't feel like it's huge and intimidating. Break down the writing process, try to give really interesting prompts and ideas. And then one of the things that I also like to do is combine art and writing together. Partly that's because you have a lot of creative kids who, writing should be creative. I see it as a creative endeavor, not as a red pen endeavor. And then on top of that, a lot of reluctant writers, one of the things that makes them reluctant is that it's actually a lot of work to do the physical act of writing. And combining some art with it actually gives them the exercise, the actual pen exercise that they need in order to not have that be such a chore. They build muscles. They develop the ability to do that over a long time, but it comes when you can break that down into little bits, art's mixed in with it, and it's interesting things instead of just, it's time to write, you need to write a story or an essay. That's overwhelming. Anyone would be reluctant with that.
Yeah, and that's what I used to do. I would just say, "Okay, guys, we're going to write a report about frogs because that's what we're doing in science." And that's all I knew how to do. And then I would be disappointed when their report wasn't very good, but I hadn't ever taught them how to write a sentence. I hadn't taught them how to construct a proper paragraph, and I didn't know that I had to. I didn't know how to break that stuff down. And Writer's Workshop helps the parent break that stuff down into those tiny steps with high interest, really fun, interesting, visually attractive assignments or exercises that kids get to try.
Yeah, and it also kind of helps to separate out, like, not that they're not doing any of their own writing, but I used to think like, okay, if we are going to learn, dependent clauses, then they need to write me a paragraph using dependent clauses or something. And so then you're wrapping in all of this, like you said, like the handwriting, which can be exhausting, the coming up with fresh ideas, the, using this new skill. And so for me, it's been really helpful where, we're learning a new concept, but it's not wrapped into them writing something new and original. It's like, okay, we're going to cut out these things and play with them and, roll a die or draw things out of a bowl or something, so that they're playing with that concept, but it doesn't have to be predicated on them like coming up with like a, original piece of writing in that lesson time.
Yeah. I think that's part of the breaking it down. When you're breaking it into little manageable chunks instead of tackling an entire gigantic thing, it's really helpful for kids who would otherwise be reluctant. They don't mind rolling the die and writing a little bit, especially if it's like a silly sentence or it's, if it can be a little bit fun and more interesting instead of just constant composition. And then I'm going to come back and red pen you. That's hard for kids to get behind when they're just being corrected instead of being celebrated for their ideas.
Yeah. Yep.
Another thing that I learned, a skill for me, is that pre-writing exists. I'd never done pre-writing with my kids. It didn't occur to me that before I handed them assignment and told them to go off and write, that we needed to spend some time thinking about it, coming up with ideas and writing those down and, drawing a picture or just different methods to come up with ideas to begin with. We didn't do pre-writing, but Writer's Workshop teaches pre-writing with everything that you do. So that has been hugely helpful, because one of the stumbling blocks that my reluctant writers had was that they didn't have any ideas. They were just handed this giant blank slate and they're supposed to fill it up with they didn't know what. And so they rebelled a little.
Yeah. So, I like the concept of sharing the pen with my kids. We talk a lot in our whole homeschool, we talk a lot. It's a very discussion-based homeschool that we have. And I've taught them writing is not just the physical act of writing. Writing is about your ideas. You are sharing the things that you know, that you believe, that you think, that you've discovered. And so I'm totally fine with sitting down and doing some of their writing. They do some, I do some. As they're growing into the writing process, I don't actually expect them to compose full things on their own. That's also a step-by-step, break it down thing that I'm willing to join in with them and do. So yeah, we share the pen a lot, and I write a little bit, they write a little bit, and we build it up that way.
Yeah, love that. So one of the struggles I have in my homeschool, definitely I have those who are reluctant writers, who need a little, coaxing and encouragement, or even just kind of like a fleshing out of what is writing so that they can kind of get behind what they're doing. The other struggle I have is I have a couple who are, they're kind of like I have a journal and I'm filling up page after page, and these are girls and, they're writing like these essays or, the next great American novel or something like that. But then the idea of like, okay, let's take that and revise it, or let's go through it. It's like, I don't want to do that. I just want to sit here and like pour out word after word after word. But the idea of, I think part of it is, like I'll say, let's write a paragraph. And they're like, can I write 2 pages? And I'm thinking, yeah, but you don't want to edit 2 pages. Edit 2 pages. So have you ever dealt with like somebody who loves to do all the pouring out, but then is, like maybe emotional or just overwhelmed at the idea of going back to edit it all, or to work through it again?
That's my daughter, my oldest daughter, Elizabeth. She is an awesome writer, and she loves to write, and she's like that. She'll just fill pages and pages and pages. But yeah, if I say, okay, go back and revise it, that's too overwhelming. So what I've done for her, I read through it, and then I give her suggestions in really specific areas. And if you'll use the rubric that we provide in the various units, they can help you with those kind of specific areas that you can look at. But let's say she's writing a story. I might say, I love your story and I like your setting, but I don't feel like your character's connected with your setting. Your character right here is lonely. What's something that you could show in the setting that is lonely? And then she has to think about that. So she's not actually revising everything. She's revising that idea. So we might talk about some specific things, or I might say, I love your story, but you didn't have any dialogue. Do you think you could find like 3 or 4 places that you could change it from just saying what happened to showing me through a conversation? And so they're growing, but you're not saying you have to go and revise this whole entire thing. You're getting them started on one way to revise it. And it's actually going to teach them more writing skills than if you have them revise every single thing all of the way through, because they really become focused on that skill. And then the next time they write, it gets incorporated into when they're pouring themselves out. They go, ooh, I should pour out a conversation. I should connect the setting. It becomes part of what they have internalized. Whereas if you actually have them just revise the whole thing and look for mistakes, they don't internalize as much. So don't worry about having them make everything perfect or what you would write. Instead, find something that they can improve. And inevitably, the writers will actually continue that on and find more things because they're natural writers. So I would try to keep breaking it down that way. If that's what I do with my daughter.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. That's good. So let's see. Lainey said, for my son with dysgraphia, we use a voice recognition program to remove the physical act of handwriting or typing. This has helped me see how ideas flourish without that piece, even for my kids without a learning disability. And then she mentioned that the only pre-writing she learned in school was outlining, and she hated that.
Yeah. There are so many fun ways to pre-write. Outlining is great for if you're doing an essay. That's a perfect tool for an essay. It's just built for it. But there are a lot of fun pre-writing things. If you actually look at most of the exercises in Writer's Workshop, you talked about the rolling the dice and things like that. Those are mostly actually pre-writing exercises if you break it down. It's the things that are sparking ideas that you're starting to talk about. What are you going to write about? And here are some ways to jump off from these ideas. Yeah. So this is kind of, Writer's Workshop is kind of a book of pre-writing. if you really look at it that way. And then, I try to take you through the rest of the writing process as well. But it's helping kids get started, and getting started is the hardest part of writing.
Yeah, that's so true. One of the things when you were talking about kind of ideas, or how your thinking changed, and that kind of opened up a maybe a obstacle that was in the way in your homeschool. So, my son is very creative in terms of drawing. And I just got to thinking how he draws a ton, but a very small percentage of what he draws does he actually outline in Sharpie and color it all in and put it up on the wall. Most of his drawings just come and go, and they mostly wind up in the trash, or, in the back of some notebook or something like that. And I just thought how much pressure our kids have if we expect everything that they do is going to go all the way down the train to a finished product. That's not how we do anything else in life. We don't
know. I don't know where we got the idea that we need to do that in writing, because we just don't. I would say that 90% of what my kids write never goes through the writing process.
Yeah.
And that's so valuable to feel free to just write and not have it ever be evaluated. Oops.
Sorry, my Alexa's making announcements. But yeah, it is really freeing to just say, we don't have to be perfect in all that we write. We're growing as writers. We're not publishing, literally publishing everything we do. Even professional writers, I would say most of what they write doesn't end up going all the way through the writing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've read so many stories about writers who just have these little books where they start sketching out ideas, and sometimes they go somewhere and sometimes they don't. And, then when they need a new idea, they might flip through, 10, 20, 50 ideas and be like, okay, I'll take that one and do something with it, continue on with that. Okay. So one of the questions that someone in our group asked earlier this month was, if you're doing, say, a free writing project or something, and you're wanting to give your kids that freedom, you don't have to worry about how you spell it, because this isn't the finished product. This is just, free writing. This is just about getting your ideas on paper, but they are asking you every other word. How do I spell this? How do I spell this? How do I spell that? What do you do in that situation?
I spell it for them. But if you have a lot of children, that can get overwhelming. And you can actually prevent some of this with a pre-writing activity where they're talking about their ideas and you're jotting notes. As you're jotting notes, you're spelling the words. And then you hand them the notes, and then it's spelled for them, and they have most of the words already there for them.
It's kind of like creating a word bank, just right there during the pre-write.
Yeah, but it's a word bank of their ideas, their words. So
love it.
That's one way.
And we do that often. We've got a whiteboard that we put in the middle of our table. And if everyone in the family doing the same kind of subject, often I will be the pen. I'll write their ideas as they go. And then everybody can see this whiteboard, but they might not all use all of the same ideas that we talked about. They just grab what they want to. So that can be really helpful for that. But I also just tell my kids, do your best spelling. We'll figure it out later.
And if they're worried about it, as they get a bit older, maybe 9 or 10 and so on, they can use a spelling dictionary or a dictionary. I see there's a comment there that Jennifer uses an app called Easy Spelling that they talk into and it spells for them. That's excellent. If you have several children, those kinds of things can save your life, save your sanity.
We actually have an Alexa in our schoolroom, and so my kids ask all the time. They ask her how to spell words instead of asking me, which is lovely. So,
yeah. Well, so I feel like I'm an awful speller, and so what I've taught my kids is, not that we don't want to grow in our spelling abilities and learn the reasons why things are spelled the way they're spelled and all that. But I feel like one of the things that makes you good at whatever it is you do is knowing where your strengths are and knowing where your weaknesses are. Because, it's one thing to be a bad speller and know that you're a bad speller, but it's another thing to be a bad speller and not know that you're a bad speller. Because, the person who knows that they're not a good speller is going to, check the dictionary or ask Alexa or whatever. And so I feel like one of the tools for our kids really is just, learning where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then learning to make use of available resources. So, learning to use, like Jennifer said, an app, or ask Alexa, or, ask your phone or whatever, just to know where it is you're going to need that extra check or assistance.
Yeah. For my high school kids, they all have laptops, and we have Grammarly on their laptops. It's a free program. You can get Grammarly for Word, and then it's right there as they're typing. it helps correct. And I love it because it actually tells them, here's the mistake and here's why. It explains it. So it's like Grammarly giving them a little mini lesson, and I don't even have to. And so constantly as they're writing, they're just seeing, oh, here's the fix. And the cool thing is all they have to do is click it. They don't even have to fix the spelling mistake. They just click it and it fills in the word for them. And so there are so many tools now that even if you are not a natural speller.
When you think back to our childhood,
I know.
Things were tougher in the dark ages.
Yeah, if you're really bad speller like me and your teacher tells you to look it up in the dictionary, but you're not even starting the word with the right letter, you're in a bit of a conundrum.
But spell checks and Grammarly and things like that are incredible at not only detecting the mistake, but trying to figure out what you were saying and fixing it. They fix commas and grammar errors and all kinds of things. And so it's pretty easy once they get to that point. The editing part, they can do. I still help my kids, but a lot of it they get to do on their own because they have those tools.
Makes perfect sense. Let's see. Oh, okay. So here's another good one, especially if we're working with a wide range of ages of kids, ones who are more prolific writers, ones who are just getting started, or even like, one of the things in my homeschool is, I have my oldest is a son who is dyslexic, and then followed by 3 girls who are all very like, can I write 2 pages instead of a paragraph kind of girls. Yeah. So, we've had to navigate a little bit of like obviously in my mind, I have different expectations for each one of those. And I don't necessarily announce that publicly, but it becomes kind of obvious that different people are doing different things as we're working together at the table. Have you ever encountered struggles like people comparing themselves to others, or people feeling frustrated, even maybe like the more prolific writers feeling frustrated that you're expecting more of them than of the 9-year-old who's only having to write a paragraph, or any of those kind of dynamics with multiple ages together?
Yeah, that's a little bit tough. I've worked really, really hard in our homeschool to almost enforce positivity. Like, my kids are not allowed to say negative things about their siblings' writings because I just don't put up with it. I think it's so hurtful when you've created something to have someone smash it, that we actually have little lessons whenever I feel it's needed. But we go through and say, how can we be positive? We clap for each other when they read their writing out loud, and we applaud and say positive things. And we work really, really hard at that. I kind of have the same situation as you. My oldest son, he is a real math science brain. And then my oldest daughter is a really reading, writing, artistic type of brain. And so they both kind of get jealous of each other in
the opposite areas.
In the opposite areas. He finishes math like that, and she writes like crazy. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of that rivalry. And I don't know that there's a perfect fix for it, but I really kind of try to crush the negativity immediately, because I think it's hurtful when, I don't know, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And I do point that out to them. I say, you know what? She is awesome at writing, but you smoke her at math. That's just how it is. And we all have our different skills and talents, and it's not going to be even and fair. And especially when you're homeschooling a huge variety of ages, if you actually gave them all exactly the same assignment, that's what would be unfair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I agree. At least in our homeschool, the struggle isn't necessarily that they're down on each other. It's more like down on themselves. Like, why can she do that and I can't? But what you just said about your son and your daughter and the math and the writing, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's see,
and my kids do that with me sometimes too. They'll say, Mom, I sit down with you and you know everything to do on the story. And they think that I'm like, oh, Mom, you do it so much better. And I'm like, how many years have I been doing this, first of all? And we're in it to help each other. So if somebody has a strength, that's awesome. They bring that strength to you too. You get to borrow their strengths. So, hey, you can have your sister read your paper and give you suggestions because she loves to write. So we try to spin it in a positive way.
Yeah, that's yes. I love that. I love the sharing the strengths. That's a new one. I hadn't thought of that. Jennifer says, I choose to use totally different curriculum with my oldest two, who were 3 years
apart. I think she meant.
Okay, yeah, thank you. 3 years apart and worked at the same level. Yeah, so I guess if they're using completely different resources, then there's not as much
Less comparison.
They wouldn't realize.
Yeah, that's smart.
My two oldest sons, they're closer in age than that. They're less than 2 years apart, but they ended up being exactly in the same place in math. I taught them the same lessons at the same time, and it didn't really bother my oldest. He would just go, whatever, I don't care. I kind of wanted him to be bothered.
Right?
I think competitive drive.
I was like, come on, have a little drive here. I wanted him to feel a little bit of desire to do better, and he didn't really feel that.
so use the competition.
Use the competition. But yeah, I think you have to be careful not to create jealousy and not to encourage jealousy between your children. So it's tough, but I think that's kind of more of it's parenting more than homeschooling per se, because every kid is so different, and you just have to sort of navigate around the way your kids think and the way that they respond to things
and try to point out their strengths. They have to learn to recognize their strengths. They're probably not going to go on to a career of writing if they don't love writing, but they can get to the point where they can navigate this world and this life in a successful way and share ideas as a writer, even if they don't absolutely love it, or even if their sister's better.
I think that's one of the disservices sometimes that schools do, and I don't think it's intentional, but kids often end up feeling like, I'm just bad at this, and therefore I am stupid. And we definitely don't want to have them feeling like that. We don't want them to think, I'm a bad writer, so I'm dumb.
We expect them to be good at everything, every subject. You have to be at this level in every subject at this age, and it doesn't actually make any sense to do that. We don't do it in other areas. We don't make every kid learn every instrument. We don't make every kid do every sport.
Yep.
But we somehow expect that in public school, that you have to be really good at every single subject.
It's also like looking for growth in your kids and pointing out growth where they've gotten better, not how they're comparing to their sibling or how they're meeting a benchmark, but about how they have grown. That can be really helpful to boost their self-esteem, their understanding of themselves, and they can see that they can get better at things. So
absolutely. Yeah, we were reading a biography recently of Isaac Newton. So you immediately think like, okay, this brilliant math science guy. And when he went to, I guess it was Oxford, anyway, higher education, he was all into reading these things about math theorems. And his professors were like, why are you doing that? It's not even in the curriculum, because the curriculum was so humanities focused. It was like, what he was getting a degree that involved like, probably like theology and philosophy and, history and all that kind of stuff. And so it's so funny to think how just in different seasons or different, periods in history, different things are valued and different things are seen as like, this is the measure of a smart person, or this is the measure of intelligence. And, if we lived in a society where oral tradition was the thing, then, handwriting wouldn't be such a like, oh no, my kid can't write.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is
for me to remember at least. All right, well, I'm going to put up a little box here at the bottom to show you guys a link to the Writers Workshop. There's a whole page on Michelle and Karen's site that tells, a lot of the things we've talked about, but just will give you an overview of the pieces of the Writers Workshop in terms of like the pieces that you can purchase, and they are super affordable. So if you're thinking like, this sounds good, but I can't afford a whole nother curriculum, like you could start with a $5 investment and get yourself up and running, and like, how does this all work, and try some things out. And like I said, it's been hugely helpful. I will say, so I would say that I'm a Brave Writer mama, and I, have used Brave Writer materials, and I own the Writer's Jungle. And that was where I kind of had the transformation that Michelle was talking about, just in terms of like, oh, this isn't just about like checking spelling and adding in periods. This is about encouraging them to think and have ideas. And I do love the Brave Writer material, but I've found the Writers Workshops to be super nuts and boltsy practical, like, oh, okay, I can do this tomorrow. I can print this out. I can do this lesson in 20 minutes and I totally know what I'm doing. I know what I'm supposed to get out of it. Like I know what I'm expecting them to be able to do by the end of it.
Yeah, so they're really designed to be, you just pick it up, open the book, and you're going. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do a lot of planning.
Yeah, a lot of it is it's not like, oh, this is what a third grader would do and this is what a seventh grader would do. It's an idea that you're working on.
Yeah, and you can do it. Almost every exploration or every exercise is going to be applicable to all of your kids. So we do it family style. All of our children are working on the same writing project at the same time. But what your 6-year-old is doing is going to be different from what your 14-year-old ends up doing because they're obviously at different ability levels. But you can all work on the same basic idea. You start from the same place.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to tell you, Lena, when I wasn't familiar for a long time with Brave Writer, and I've never bought anything Brave Writer because I was doing this all along and it's always worked for us. But I do listen to her podcasts and sometimes I feel like, oh yeah, that's totally how I do it. That's totally what I believe. I feel like it's really the same philosophy of writing that we share. And I don't know what her products are like. They're probably phenomenal because she's phenomenal. But it's really that same philosophy of writing is about growth. It's about communication, not about just a checklist of skills, but about having kids express themselves creatively through ideas that are really valid, even if they're kids. They're valid ideas and they have something to share.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably the two meld pretty well, I would guess.
Yeah, we were talking earlier in our group about, I had shared a couple of Julie's videos, and so we have like text discussion chats once a month, and so some of the moms were asking, actually I think Lainey was asking, so tell me about this free writing. And the more we talked about it, she was kind of like, okay, well that sort of sounds like what I'm already doing. That kind of is what I've kind of come to over the years. And so I think Julie, like and what you guys are sharing, it's kind of like on the one hand revolutionary because it kind of pulls us out of our stuck in this mindset of what we thought we were supposed to do, but on the other hand it's very like common sense. Very like once you think that way, it's like I didn't do that before, or realize that before, because it this way of thinking about writing meshes so much better with how I've learned to think about so many other things in the homeschool, right? Like I a long time ago shed that mindset about like, but this is third grade math. You have to be able to, add fractions if you're in third grade. Like, well, whatever, we'll get to adding fractions eventually. If you can't do it this year, we'll figure it out next year, whatever. But yet, I hadn't really shed that kind of like, but you have to be able to spell this word because you're 7. How can you not spell this word when you're 7 or whatever, with relation to writing. So, all right, well, I'm going to hang out here for just a couple minutes more in case anybody has a question. You can ask it over here in the chat window over on the side, or you can put it in the ask a question box. So we have been doing with the writers workshops the first month, and this is I'm just following the program that they've laid out, but the first month we spent basically just getting acquainted with what our writers workshops were and our writers workshop notebooks and all that, and they have come to really look forward to writing each day, each morning. And so this month what we're working on is sentences or I guess what is it, words and sentences and paragraphs or something.
The sentences, paragraphs, and narrations.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
And so that has been a huge breakthrough for us because, like I said before, I always struggled with like, okay, I can tell my oldest son would start his paragraphs with what was really a title, how to draw a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not a sentence. That could be your title. That could be at the top as your title, but that's not a sentence. But I couldn't tell him why that wasn't a sentence. Like, I know it's not a sentence. I can just instinctively tell, but I couldn't explain to him. And so we did this activity with subjects and predicates. And, once they kind of saw these are the two parts of the sentence, all of a sudden, with hardly any effort, they could pick out that's not a sentence or that's a run-on sentence because you basically have like subject, predicate. I could make 2 sentences out of that. And it was like, oh, all I needed was like that little hook, that little handhold to give them something kind of concrete. And now, they're able to do that. Whereas before it was kind of like, I know I want them to go from A to B, but I don't know how to get there.
That's how I always have felt too. So I think that's pretty common. I hope it is. Maybe it's just you and me.
I really tried to break it down. Like, these are the skills that you need to do these particular tasks in writing. And then how can I break it down as much as possible? So you're not focused on all the skills. You're just going to learn this one little bit, one little bit of the recipe. And then little by little, they start to put those things together. And you'll see a transformation in their writing as they start to put it together into bigger and bigger pieces.
Yep.
So I hope it will work for kids. It's worked great for my kids, and I've taught a lot of co-ops that it's worked great in. And so I'm hoping that so far I've gotten really good feedback from families that are saying, wow, this has really helped and changed the way I'm teaching writing, which is what is going to change the way your kids become writers when you change your mindset.
Yep. So Lainey has an interesting question. She said, do you think that large families are more apt to come to those conclusions, meaning that homeschooling doesn't have to look like something particular like third grade math or 7-year-olds are supposed to spell this? Do you think large families come to those conclusions more easily?
Probably, just because you have a bigger sample set. Every single one of my children is different from the others. They have all learned different skills at different times and in different ways. Things clicked differently. They struggled on different things from each other. And seeing that, I think, makes you realize, oh, education really isn't and shouldn't be one size fits all. Benchmarks are they're useless when you're talking about one particular child. They're useful when you're talking about large populations. So if you don't need a benchmark to think about your son, he's an individual person.
You need to think about growth, not a benchmark. As long as they're progressing, that's what you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard. I mean, I have taught in classrooms. It's really hard when you're teaching 30 kids that are all the same age, but you recognize they're on different abilities. It's easier to define it as, okay, these are the skills that we're going to work on. And so I'm going to try to get all of these 30 kids to this benchmark. It's almost impossible to focus on individuals when you have that many little kids all of the same age. So I understand why they do that. It's very valuable as a teacher to have that tool. But as a homeschool mom, I encourage moms to back off from that and instead find the individual gifts and talents that your kids have and help them grow from where they're at, because it's a lot more effective than trying to normalize them into a standardized benchmark. It's not necessary, and it's not as effective. So I do think that in big families, we kind of get forced into that a little bit, because when you go, I can't actually help all the people with each individual, whatever they need at every moment. And it was enlightening to me when my son was struggling with a concept in math, and he's my math science minded kid, but he was struggling. And I said, you know what, let's just not do it for a little bit. And we actually went on and he did other math. We left that topic for a little bit. I think it was maybe a week or a week and a half later, we returned to it and he went, oh, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
His mind just wasn't ready right then.
Yep.
But it was ready a little bit later, and he got it without any problem.
Yep. Yeah. Lainey says almost exactly what you said, Karen. I think it's also because we have less time to focus on everything for all the people all the time.
Yes.
You don't have time to focus on exactly where should this child be at this moment in her education, because you're too busy.
But I think sometimes, though, moms that have a lot of kids, homeschool moms that have a lot of kids, feel like, I can't really be serving them all well. I can't be teaching them all what they're supposed to be. They get overwhelmed by it and they get down on themselves for it. And I actually am grateful that I brought my kids up in this big family style, because they learned to work with kids of all ages. The big ones were mentors for my little ones. The little ones looked up to their siblings. Mm-hmm. We learned partnership and cooperation and so many things that wouldn't have happened without it. And there are some really valuable life lessons that I am grateful my kids had that. And I don't think that we have to be so hard on ourselves, as I can't get to everybody all the time and I'm so divided. We worry about that so much. I don't think we need to. I think we need to be a little bit easier on ourselves and enjoy the homeschool experience a little bit more instead of packing the pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And just accepting the fact that each of our unique families is going to create a different homeschool environment, a different, like, even frankly, a different education. You know, if I had only 2 children, I would be providing them a different education. I don't know what that would look like, but I just know that, you know, dynamically it's going to look different depending on your, you know, and all kinds of things, not just number of kids, but all kinds of factors that go into, like, whether you have a husband who's home a lot or not home a lot, or whether you know, you as a mom are have strengths in different things or whatever. Like, all of that goes into, you know, your particular homeschool is going to have a particular flavor. And God put these kids in this flavored homeschool for a reason. It wasn't an accident, you know. So just kind of like, cool, this is who we are. This is where we're going.
Yeah, enjoy the ride a little bit.
Yeah. Amen. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. It's been great to get some more ideas and talk through this a little bit more. And folks, like I said, if you want to read some more about the Writers' Workshops, you can click on that link there. And Karen and Michelle have a fantastic Facebook group online where you can get answers to pretty much any questions you have before purchasing or after, or just get ideas. There's a great group of moms there who will answer all kinds of questions that you have and share resource ideas and things like that. So Jennifer says, thank you. Your resources sound great. And I'll second that. We are really enjoying those this year. So thank you, Karen and Michelle, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.